This jet-powered helicopter is really cool. I don't know why more people don't try using something like this. Oh, oh, crud. Back to the drawing board. This is Echo 3, and let's continue discussing our modded career mode playthrough. There are two contracts here I want to pick up. One is to land on the Mun, and the other is to pick up some Mun Greystone. As long as we land in the Midlands, I think we'll be in good shape. I want to grab just like a couple technologies here to assist. I want to get the P-Pod specifically, and I'd like to get maybe a little bit better fuel tanks, like the longer fuel tanks. There we go. The P-Pod specifically is able to hold 2 Kerbals, which is why I want it. I want to be able to have a pilot and a scientist. The P-Pod, though, doesn't have reaction wheels, which is why I threw a little bit of control there on the top underneath the parachute. Let's throw on as much science on this as possible. I want to get as much out of this Mun trip as possible. This upper stage needs to be able to land and take off from the Mun and get us all the way back to Kerbal. If I have extra in there, we'll be able to not just land in one location, but maybe 2 or 3 locations. I like to call these a little biome hop. That lets us get science from more than one location, and it's a great way to get lots of early science points. The Mystery Goo and the Science Junior need to be reset after each use, which is why I wanted a scientist so we could reuse those. We'll get a lot of science points just from those 2 experiments right there. The P-Pod isn't very aerodynamic though, so it is really good to use a fairing to cover that up on ascent. That is one of the hydrogen tanks, that orange one. I had to modify all of those to be able to use with my particular game. The tanks are only designed to hold hydrogen and oxygen, and I wanted to play without the hydrogen addition to the game, and so all of my engines use the normal liquid fuel and oxygen like base game, but those tanks didn't get converted over like that, so I had to actually go in and modify all the config files for that. Last part, what we're doing here is designing the ascent stage. It needs to be able to get us almost into orbit, and I'm watching my Kerbal engineer readout here to make sure I'm getting around 3,000 meters per second of delta V, but I also want to make sure I have at least 1.2 thrust to weight ratio for takeoff. So you can see I'm just messing around, trying different engine configurations, different amounts of fuel, so I can get the exact right numbers that I'm looking for. Right now it's in atmospheric mode because I'm really concerned about my initial ascent, although that 3,000 meter per second of delta V is really a vacuum total. Let's make sure our Kerbals are equipped with the right equipment. I need the EVA jetpack there because we don't have a ladder, and we'll need that to get back into the lander. Uh-oh, I didn't put my aerodynamic surfaces there square. We'll fix that. This is going to be a good harvest of science, so I figure a good harvest is a good name for the craft. Let's take off. We'll just use a standard gravity turn on this. We have a pretty good thrust to weight ratio, so we can be fairly aggressive with our turn, but this only needs to get us almost into orbit. The second stage on this craft has enough delta V to circularize our craft and transfer us to the Mun, but that's all I'm using the second stage for. So when I design rockets, I plan on how much delta V I need for each stage of the mission, and then that's what that stage needs to be able to do. In this case, my second stage only needs to do a little bit to finish the circularization burn and then just transfer over to the Mun. The upper stage there with the pod on it is actually going to do the rest of the work. So it'll circularize around the Mun, land, hopefully biome hop, take off, and return to Kerbal. And we should be a little bit overbuilt for that, but that's where I want to overbuild so I can biome hop, use any extra delta V to jump over to other nearby biomes. I know I need to land like in the Midlands to get our Mun Greystone, but other than that, anything else would be a bonus. This upper stage, I'm going to have it impact into the MUN. No sense having that flying around in space somewhere. We'll just get rid of it. We'll just eject, and then we'll raise our periapsis to around 10,000 meters, and then we'll circularize there. What I'd like to be able to do, since we can EVA, and we can get an EVA report over every biome in low space, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Although I won't necessarily show you all of that, but we'll go ahead and get that. Now to land. I have the Kerbal Engineer landing indicator up there, and it's also able to tell me what biome I'm going to land in. In this case, I need to land in the Midlands, so let's do that. This is a really flat spot. Some of those are kind of hard to find on the MUN, but this looks pretty good. So we will land here and then keep our eye out for the MUN Greystone. All right. You start to say something dramatic and poignant about the plight of Kerbal kind in this grand universe, only to be cut off by random radio chatter that the situation is nominal. All right. Good for this. Let's plant a flag, because, I don't know, that's what you do in Kerbal Space Program when you land somewhere new. We'll have our scientists go look out for some greystone. There's one right there. We'll go ahead and pick that up. These grayish plain stones may not look like much to the naked eye, but we've seen our scientists literally salivating at the thought of examining one of these. Probably because they think the MUN is made of snacks. At least Kerbals tend to like snacks. We have enough Delta V now in our rocket that we will just kind of biome hop over to the crater over here. It's not very far. We don't have to reach orbital speeds or anything. Just on a little suborbital hop. It takes several hundred meters per second to do this. Watch our landing. Hopefully we land somewhere mostly flat. Then we will repeat our experiments here, see what we can find. Again, this is to maximize our science out of this mission. The aircraft missions I've been doing are a lot of fun, but they do not get me much science points. So I'm hoping to get as much science from this trip as possible, like at least 1,000 science points, which will really start opening up our tech tree. We'll plant a flag here in this little feature. Maybe we can send a rover or something back with a scanning arm. We can just need to find the flag, and then we can find that feature again. Alright, we have everything we need from the MUN. All mission objectives complete. Let's take off. For the MUN, it doesn't have an atmosphere, so we can just basically go sideways right away. We don't have to really do a gravity turn, and that's going to be your most efficient way to take off from the MUN, as long as you don't hit a mountainside or anything. For the return, we just want to eject the MUN retrograde to its orbit, so I'm messing around here with the maneuver node, trying to get that set up, and I'm shooting for a periapsis around 30,000 meters over Kerbal. Looks like we've got that. And if we time this right, we'll kind of be close to the desert launch site. Now, earlier I mentioned that I used Kerbal Engineer and its landing. When you're going to land on a body with an atmosphere, the Kerbal Engineer landing guidance doesn't do a great job. So I have another mod called Trajectories, and that's what you can see here, and it does a better job of predicting where I'm going to land. Although, because I changed the craft by ejecting the bottom portion of it, that wasn't factored in, but we're here in the desert, so that's kind of cool. We will just grab all the science from here and recover our craft, see what we came up with. I think we got quite a bit of science. Yeah, that's over 1,000 science from this mission. Recently, I got a comment on one of my videos. Someone asked how I got over 800 science on a MUN mission. Well, you just do all of the experiments. And he didn't realize, but I had brought a scientist with me, which let me redo things like the Science Junior and the Mystery Goo, which is really what adds up to a lot of science. Both of those experiments can get quite a bit of points for each use, and so I want to maximize my science. And Jeb leveled up to level 2. That'll be pretty good. Let's go and pick up a few things. I want to do some more flight contracts, so let's pick up some important things like that. I really want to get EVA experiments, docking ports, robotic parts for making planes and helicopters, and I'd like to also get some more aerodynamic parts for our planes. So there's a few things that we haven't unlocked yet. The EVA experiments will let us get more science points each time we do EVAs. So I like to unlock science points or unlock science nodes that give us the ability to generate more science, if that's possible. Now let's find a couple contracts here. There is one to land on the helipad. That should be kind of fun and actually rather doable with what we have now. And then there's another one to rescue this midshipman, Darlene. And there's a bonus if we land on the helipad. So we'll be able to do both of these missions at once. So we need to create some kind of VTOL. Earlier, I was messing around with a helicopter. For several reasons, that wasn't very good. One of the main reasons was we have to fly quite a ways out into the ocean to recover this Kerbal, and the helicopter just was not fast enough to get out there. So I tried adding jets, and I had problems keeping my helicopter stable with it also using jet engines. So I'm going to go with something a little bit more like a Harrier jump jet design. I have a tutorial where I actually show how to make a Harrier, but I'm going to make one something like that here. I need a spot for my pilot. I need a spot for this Lieutenant Zephyr, who's going to go with me on this mission. And we need something for our guy we're rescuing. So I have space for 4 Kerbals on here, so that's plenty. I am looking around, trying to see how I'm going to adjust the hinges for these engines. I'm looking at my Kerbal engine readout as well. To lift off vertically, I'll need a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1, and it's going to end up that one pair of engines will not be enough to get us off the ground. We're going to throw on just some wings here. Going to kind of use a Harrier look. I don't know. I figured the guys who made that knew what they were doing, so I'll try and copy that. I'm going to set up this hinge here and bind it to a translation group. I already limited its motion to just 90 degrees, so it'll go straight down or point back, and that's all I need there. Looking at my thrust to weight ratio, I don't quite have enough, so I made another pair. That gives us plenty of thrust to weight ratio to take off vertically. The other thing I've been watching, besides the thrust to weight ratio, is that torque, and I want to keep it as low as possible, so when the engines are pointed straight down, the engine thrust is balanced with the center of mass. And then the other thing to watch is when they're pointed back, that they're also centered with the center of mass on the craft. So the thing will fly stable no matter how I point the engines. The other thing here with the center of mass is I'm trying to keep it even. As fuel drains, the center of mass should remain about the same. Because this is a VTOL craft, I need the engines to remain in line with the center of mass no matter how the fuel shifts, or no matter how the fuel is used. So I don't want any shift in that center of mass, and that should keep us stable through all points of this flight. Just add a little bit of extra battery power. I want to make sure I can use those hinges. The jet engines will generate electricity, but I want to make sure I don't ever run out, so just a little bit of extra there. Throw on a few lights. We're trying to find some guy in the middle of the ocean at night. I thought a few lights might help us with that. Looks like we are clear for departure. Let's go find this midshipman out in the ocean. Take off. If we point these jet engines down a little bit, we can take off a little easier. And we're going to fly out. I've already got the guy marked on our map. You can see him there in the distance. So we're going to fly out to him, which is a decent ways out. So a jet definitely worked better for getting there in a more timely fashion. While you guys get to see the video footage sped up, I had to fly this obviously in real time, and I didn't want to spend over an hour trying to control a helicopter getting out to this location. I'd rather spend a few minutes with a jet, so I went with a Harrier. The other nice thing with the Harrier is we should be able to take off from the water pretty easily. I've tried some other designs with seaplanes, and I haven't quite got them working very well yet. I think part of the ocean's quite choppy, and it's just hard to get up to speed in these choppy waters. All right, we have recovered our midshipman there. Let's get him back to the Space Center. And for a little bonus, we will land on the helipad while we do it. So we'll just zip over to the Kerbal Space Center. There's the island runway over there. This craft in particular, I've felt very comfortable flying it. It seems pretty easy to maneuver. I'm quite a fan of this VTOL design. I guess if we have any other rescue contracts, we might want to try using something like this. Hopefully my piloting skills, or in this case, Jebediah's piloting skills, are good enough to land here on the helipad. This is a new design for him. I think he can do it. He's flying very stable. There we go. Bonus points right there. Landed on the helipad. Completed 2 missions with this one plane. Recovered a guy. Good job, everyone. And not really much science. Not a lot of funds off of this, but I had a lot of fun with these Kerbal remastered contracts. Last video, I highlighted a bunch of the mods I was using. Highlight all the mods I was using. And Kerbal Remastered with the Giving Aircraft a Purpose has just made flying around Kerbal a lot more fun. So we have a contract to create a space station around Kerbal. That sounds, pretty doable. I have a tutorial on how to make a space station. Now here's another one called Hold a Space Camp. So this requires having Kerbals in a space station. So I figure we can just double up these contracts. We're making a space station anyway, and it looks like we will get those Kerbals to add to our roster. So I figure that's a pretty cheap way to add a bunch of Kerbals to our roster of pilots and engineers and scientists. Now we need to, I think, maybe pick up a couple more technologies. I want to get the science lab, and that's mostly what I wanted to get. So we're going to have a probe core on here, which is also good because it has a little bit of reaction wheels. It'll help a little bit with stabilizing the station. Throw on a few solar panels, although that bottom unit there for holding Kerbals does have a little bit of power generation in it. That'll help us. I plan on expanding this station in the future, so I'm going to add docking ports to it. And at some point, we will need to recover these Kerbals. So I need docking ports to get crafts here so we can dock and get them back. Let's throw on some science experiments. That way our scientists will be able to run some, and then we'll put that data into the science lab. This isn't very aerodynamic, so I'm going to cover the whole thing in a fairing. Let's throw on, some jet packs and a few repair kits and maybe an EVA experiment kit or two. Now this second stage, our upper stage here, just kind of needs to circularize our orbit. We're just putting a space station in. If you notice, I put a probe core and some batteries on there. I intend to deorbit that section. And this last part, we need enough engine to get this most of the way into orbit, with our upper stage just finishing the circularization. Here is our Harmony station. We'll throw on a few launch clamps. This is pretty heavy on those engine bells, so I'm going to use launch clamps instead. And we're going to put this thing into orbit. I think we've met all of our mission requirements so far. So we get this into orbit, and the one contract I think requires us to be in orbit a couple days. The space camp requires the Kerbals to be in space for 40 days. So I'm not sure what we're going to be doing for 40 days while we're waiting on these guys to finish training up in low orbit here. But we've got Val, and there are a few Kerbal rescue contracts in low orbit. So perhaps we'll pick up a few Kerbals that way while we're waiting for our 40 days. We've got some ScanSat contracts to scan Minimus and to do more with the MUN, which for future missions can help us find suitable landing sites to put a MUN base down. So I think we'll consider doing some of those in the meantime. Right now we're just setting up our space station, trying to get into the proper orbit. And I'm shooting for around a 100-kilometer circular orbit. I found that that's a pretty good altitude for trying to do rendezvous and docking with the space station. It's high enough that we can get into a low orbit as needed to catch up to the space station. It's high enough to make getting to the Mun and other locations pretty easy. So I just find it tends to be a pretty good altitude. We will deorbit our upper stage. We don't need it anymore. We are really about done with this particular station. We can use, obviously, the science lab in there and our scientists to generate a little bit of science to help further along our program. Sometimes I like to use the science lab as a place to process like all of my data. I will go somewhere like the Mun or Minmus, and then rather than returning right back to Kerbin, I will try to take doubles of all of my experiments and return some of them to the science lab in low orbit. This means getting into orbit before deorbiting. It means having extra delta V with me, but it's usually worth it if I want to use the science lab. Most games I don't use the science lab. I find it tends to be a little bit overpowered, although for these extra science nodes we're playing with the community tech tree, so there's a lot more nodes, a lot more things to unlock. Perhaps the science lab is not so overpowered when you need so many more thousands and thousands of science points to unlock the full tech tree. I'm just deorbiting this upper stage, and we're just going to let it splash down. I'm not going to try and recover it. Probably could have put parachutes on it and recovered it if we wanted to, just wasn't worried about it. Right now, it is planting season for me, and we have been very busy, although currently the last couple days it's been rainy, and I've had some chance to work on my Kerbal Air and Space program game. So that's been fun. These contracts are done here, so we will transmit the science from this ScanSat satellite. I think in the future we'll be launching a few more of these to fill further contracts with those, but that'll give us a few more science points. Our program is progressing nicely. We've got lots of science points, lots of cool aircraft we've got going on, and we've been to the Mun. I don't know where we're going next. Please feel free to share your ideas. This is Echo 3, and thanks for joining me for a modded career mode save. I'll see you next time.